Over 20 podcasters, 70 weekly shows, and a 3.4-star rating on Roku TV. How y'all doing today? This is Mac, and today I get to interview Frank Lotierzo, boxing expert. Now, I don't use that term lightly because I know a lot of people in the boxing business. I've interviewed quite a few of them, but Frank is a guy that's been in boxing for years, and I'm going to bring him up here. I'm going to talk a little bit about his raising, how he grew up a little bit in boxing, his training, amateur boxing, and all the different magazines and on-site places now that they have him on where he worked, and is rolling down the bottom right now. So if you want to check that out while I'm talking to him, it'll be outstanding. So let's bring Frank up. How you doing today, Frank?
Hello, Mac. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing really good. I wanted to, as I do with all my interviews, Frank, I want to start and go way back. I want to go back to when you were a kid. Now, I know you love boxing. We know each other pretty well, at least on the air or off air, however you want to say it. We know each other pretty well. And I know that boxing was a big part of your family growing up. And your father, maybe your uncle, I heard you talk about. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay. I never knew of boxing until the night that Cassius Clay fought Sonny Liston, which is February 25th, 1964. I was 5 years old. And like most houses, people watch the 6 o'clock news. Well, the 6 o'clock news was on in our house that night. And when the sports came on, all they were talking about was the Clay Liston fight, which was taking place that night. Now, remember, I had no idea Cassius Clay was an Olympic gold medal. I didn't even know what that was at that time. I had no idea Sonny Liston was as feared and as great as he was. I knew nothing. But I saw the promo. They did about a 5-minute piece on the fight. And I was intoxicated by Cassius Clay. I can't tell you why, because I thought Sonny Liston actually had the better name. But I was just taken aback by Cassius Clay. And something inside of me said at that time, this guy is more than a boxer. And I have a feeling this guy's going to fit my life somewhere down the road. Now, again, I was like 5.5, but that's a fact. I just knew something about that name. I was drawn to that. So that night, my father, when he would go to bed at night, him and my mom, it was me and my brother. We lived in a 2-bedroom rancher in Marlton, New Jersey. And my dad would look in on me and my brother to see if we were okay before, he went to bed. And I was awake. So he cracks the door and he looks in. I said, Dad, I'm not asleep. I said, who won the fight? He said, your boy, Cassius Clay, won the fight. He goes, go to sleep. I'll tell you about it tomorrow. So I'm like, yeah, okay. And Mac, from that point on, I was intoxicated, blown away by Cassius Clay, later Muhammad Ali. I've often said to many people that know me, if Ali would have been a quarterback or a third baseman or a goalie, I probably would have become obsessed with those sports. But when there's an athlete that you really like, it forces you to follow the team. And if it's a team sport, then you follow that team. And then what happens is you want to see where the team fits in with the rest of the league. Just like when I met Larry Zonka and Jim Kick in 1970. Well, I became a Dolphins fan. And what happened? I started following the Dolphins. Well, it's like, hey, they were pretty good at that time. Well, where do they fit in the paradigm of the other teams? And it's like, at that time, I was pretty lucky. They were at the top, basically. So that got me into boxing, and I followed it from that point on. So say February of 1964. And it just so happened that my father, who never played any sports, but he was a big, tough, macho guy, he liked boxing too. So instead of going to ball games, he and my uncle, we went to see fights. We went to see fights live. We saw them closed circuit, or we went to the Spectrum to see the fights in Philly. And then I had an older cousin, my cousin Artie, who was 10 years older than me, 10 years younger than my father. He was my dad's first cousin. Artie was like my surrogate big brother. He was a tough guy. He liked boxing too. And he would take me to the fights. And lo and behold, you know, that became my addiction. And then when I was about 16, I had a friend who lived on the next block from me. He was 5 years older than me. And he was big into lifting weights. And he tried to get me into lifting weights. And I did it for a while, Mac, but I just didn't like it. It wasn't my thing. I'd be throwing punches and, you know, shadow boxing and talking about Ali. So he said, I have to get you in a ring somewhere. I have to get you somehow exposed to boxing. Well, at that time, way before MMA, in Haddonfield and Cherry Hill, New Jersey, there were no boxing gyms. To get exposed to boxing, to box, to watch boxers train, you had to go over the bridge into Philly.
Right.
So one day, my buddy takes me to, remember Jim Correa? I don't know if he was known in New York, but he owned a gym, one of the fitness gyms. He was on a lot of big shows. A lot of the Eagles and Phillies and Sixers would go to his gym and train. He did a radio show in Philly. I think it was Dr. Correa on sports. So he goes there, and my buddy pulls him aside. He goes, look, he goes, where can I get this kid into boxing? And he said, look, he goes, the only place I know, he says, is the Cherry Hill Police Athletic League that opened about a year ago. It's on Haddonfield Road, which was 1 mile from where we were. He said, go there and see where that leads you. So the next day I go there, and, you know, I walk in and I see a ring, and I'm just totally blown away by the ring. And the picture of Ali and Foreman up in the corner. And I just knew I wanted to try it. And it so happened to be that Joey Giardello was the head trainer there. He's the former middleweight champion of the world. So he trained me for a while. And he was no big Ali fan, but it was basically because Ali was black, because in those days, you know, it was divided among the ethnic groups and the races. It's like the Irish guys are the best, or the black guys, or the Italians, or the Spanish, whatever.
Sure. So
Giardello trained me for about a year, and I had, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 amateur fights with him. And he said, look, he goes, you're the best guy in the gym now. He goes, do you want to be the champ at Cherry Hill, or do you want to get better? So I thought, I'd like to get better. So he said, go to Frazier's gym tomorrow and ask for George Benton. Now, at that time, it was a big deal because George Benton and Joey Giardello actually fought. And Benton won, but he never got a shot at the title, where Giardello did. But they were good friends. So I walked in. I asked for Benton. I said, Joey told me to ask for you. He goes, yeah, he called me last night. And from that point on, I started training at Frazier's gym from like 77 to 82.
So let me stop you there. I mean, you mentioned the divide of the races and the creeds and the different nationalities. There was also a divide in the country between Ali and Frazier. And Ali and Frazier, of course, they had 3 fights, 2 that were unbelievable. The first 2, I think, were 2 of the best fights I've ever seen.
The first and the third, Mac.
The first one, Frazier, I thought I did win. The second fight, I thought Frazier won the second fight. To be honest with you,
it was very close. Some people do think that. I think Ali won it, but it wasn't by as much as the margin that Frazier beat him by.
Right, and in the third fight, of course, Frazier didn't come out of his corner, and Ali won because of that. So Frank, here you are. You're a huge Ali fan, and you're training at Joe Frazier's gym. And that's kind of, I mean, when you talk about Joe Frazier, normally, like I say, growing up, you liked Ali or you liked Frazier with the people I hung around with. You had a chance to work in his gym, meet Joe, meet his son. You knew his son pretty well, and you're training in pretty much the enemy's camp. So when you talk about Frazier, it's not a bad. You're very respectful. You love Joe Frazier, not as much as Ali, but you do have a deep respect for Joe Frazier, which I think is awesome.
Mac, here's the thing. When I was a little kid or younger in my preteen years, and I guess, well, by the time Frazier and Ali fought the last time, I was 17. So say between the ages of 11 and 17. But even go back before that, because when Ali was exiled and Frazier was on the ascend, I feared for Ali because I wasn't sure Ali could beat him. So I was one of those weird guys that, as much as I loved Ali, I had a ton of respect for Frazier as a fighter. And I knew stylistically, Joe matched up with Ali, and his style would always be trouble for Ali. And I think it's a testament that over the 41 rounds, I've scored them completely, and I've went from 1 to 41, and I think I scored it 21 Ali, 19 Frazier, and 2 even.
Right.
If I'm not, that should total 41 rounds. And the funny thing is, Mac, when we at Frazier's gym, we were not allowed to mention Ali's name. When Ali's name come up, Joe's attitude would change. Now remember, this is 1977. This is 2 years after Manila. Frazier's bitter because Eddie Futch stopped the fight. He wanted to go out for the last round. He would have got killed, but he still wanted to go out on his shield. So,
sure.
but yeah, it was kind of ironic. And it's like, even as a little kid, I have to admit, I kind of like Frazier's inside fighting style better than Ali's moving around and boxing and picking his spots. But you know this as well as I do. Ali was just maybe the most charismatic human being ever born, and you just couldn't not like him.
I didn't like him in the beginning because of what he said about Joe Frazier, called him an Uncle Tom, called him a gorilla. And really, if you think about it, and a lot of people don't know this, Joe Frazier came from the poor side of town. He came from
Joe Frazier was more black than Ali in a lot of ways.
Ali was
or lived the black experience. Yes.
Yes. So I mean, a lot of people don't know that, but that's true. So really, Joe was really I don't say the blacker of the two, but you know what I'm saying. Historically,
well, he was actually. If you go by skin tone, he was.
That too. Right.
But he lived the blacker experience, Mac.
Right. There you go.
Did.
That's exactly.
Okay.
That's a great way to put it. So now you go ahead. Sorry, Frank. Go ahead.
Well, and I've always thought that Ali made it personal and ugly because, and I've said this countless times, and I think if Ali was alive and was sitting in on this conversation, he'd probably admit it. Ali never was comfortable with the idea he couldn't get to Frazier. He knew Joe wasn't intimidated by him. He looked at him as equals. So Ali was always trying to find an angle to rough him up and make it, make him unravel him and make him come out of his game. Sort of like the way Donald Trump works. He'll say anything to try to break it and just to get control of what's going on and be the topic of conversation. And I think that made Ali crazy.
Yeah, I agree. Now let's talk a little bit about your trainer, George Benton. He's a Hall of Fame trainer. Yeah, he's a Hall of Fame trainer, Frank. And was he an important part of you establishing yourself as a good amateur? Well, in Philadelphia, you're going to 3 Golden Glove boxing championships. And you were runner-up in each one, but you're there. You're right on the precipice of being the champion of Philadelphia, which back then Philadelphia that's the boxing capital of the world, basically, to me. So was Benton a big part of that, Frank?
Well, because he was so good and he was so smart, Every time he showed you something, it hurt. And he was just a guy that you just respected, and you knew that he knew what he was talking about. And you listened to him, because if you did what he said, most of the time it worked. And he was great at teaching guys like me who had no defense on how to protect themselves and how to slip punches and block them, and, you know, block the hook and the uppercut and so forth. Yeah, he was an impressive guy, and we developed a pretty good friendship. And Mac, he used to come to me and ask me who I thought was going to win certain fights, because he used to bet on the fights at the time. And he said, boy, he goes, he called all white guys John. So he always called me John. He said, John, he says, you break them down really good and you're seldom wrong. And there were a couple of big fights where I talked him out of betting on Tommy Hearns over Ray Leonard. And I talked him out of betting on Tommy Hearns over Marvin Hagler. And there's a couple others, and it's like he would slip me money sometimes. He'd come in the gym and he'd call me outside and he'd say, hey, come here. And he'd slip me $100 or $200. And he says, look, he goes, I don't want to do it in the gym because guys will be hitting me up for money. He goes, but I listened to your pick. He goes, and I won, and I wanted to take care of you.
So you've been in fight business since you started way back when you're 16, 17 years old. You become a writer. Let's talk about your ESPN radio show first. A lot of people don't know about this. Toe to Toe. You're on the radio. Do you have a co-host?
ESPN Radio 1490.
Right. Do you have a co-host there, or is it just you going solo? What are you actually doing at that time with that broadcast?
I did have a co-host because I did a sports show. And on the weekend, it was the boxing show. On the boxing show, I didn't have a co-host, but on the sports show, I did. It was a female. Her name was Lucy Jones. She ended up going to WIP. I don't think she's in the business anymore. And she was a pretty big boxing fan. And then she had her own show on WMCW TV in Atlantic City. And I used to be her guest and co-host the show a lot. And I did a show with Roy Foreman called the Foreman Boxing Magazine. In fact, I was his first co-host. Nice. And I think I did 8 or 9 shows with him. And then we ran into we had a little bit of a personality problem. His fiance at that time, I'll just say this much, she wasn't a big Frank fan, and she thought I was trying to take over the show, which I was not trying to do that. I just wanted to try to make it better. So I think maybe I was a little too enthusiastic for her. And I think she thought I was trying to upstage him, which was not the case at all.
I hear you. You do have a very, not aggressive, but a very forthright personality, which I love about you. Now, in writing, Frank, you wrote a lot for a lot of different magazines and different articles you came out. I loved your Jimmy Young article, by the way. I thought that was a real good article that you wrote on Jimmy Young. Sometimes when you write articles, it seems, you're going in depth. Sometimes people take you as a controversial writer. I don't. I think you're just sharing opinion in a lot of your different writings. But what kind of style do you have, Frank?
Mac, I had a buddy who had a buddy or is friends with a guy who was a lit professor. And I didn't know this at the time, but my buddy would send his buddy copies of my articles because the professor was a boxing fan. And he would get back to my friend and say, boy, he goes, this Latirzo, he doesn't really write with any fat. And he goes, I've never met the guy, but something tells me he writes the way he speaks. And that was basically my style. I didn't try to write for attention or comments. I just thought there was something to be said. I didn't see it being said. And I tried to be as objective as I can. And what made me feel good is I would write an article on, say, Ali Leonard, Mayweather, and I would get email because I always put my email at the bottom of the articles because I wanted it to be known that if anybody had a problem with something I said, you can get in touch with me and I will debate you or talk to you about it if you have issue, if you take issue with what I said. And I remember many times, again, I wrote about Ali, Mayweather, Leonard, whoever, the big names. And if I got 10 or 12 emails, 6 or 7 would say, "You're so far up Ali's rear end, your nose is brown." And the other 5 would say, "Why do you hate Ali? Are you racist? Why do you hate Ali? Did you have an uncle that went in the Vietnam War and because he didn't go, you hate him?" So I thought, I must be doing okay because I'm getting it from both sides. So that means I'm not giving anybody a pass. Right. You know, it's like, Mac, I'll never forget. I went to the first Ali Frazier fight and I tried to convince myself that Ali won. And I knew that Frazier won, but I was hurt because he didn't win. Well, the guy that lived across the street from me, the Super 8mm tape came out at that time. I don't know if you remember those things. The Super 8, and you could, and they had, it was like $20. So it had selected rounds. So the deal was, he had the projector. I paid for the tape. So the deal was, I couldn't watch it without him at his house, but he couldn't watch it without me because I had the tape at my house.
Right.
So one night, and he was a big Frazier fan. So one night we're up in the attic and we're playing the fight, and I'm throwing punches and saying, "Look, man, Ali outlanded him 5-1, blah, blah, blah." And he fell asleep. So here I'm trying to con him that Ali won, and here I'm putting the show on and he fell asleep. And all of a sudden, he's sleeping. I'm watching the fight. And this voice came into my head, or this thought, and it said, "Frank, guy's asleep. You don't have to perform anymore. If you landed from another planet, who do you really think is kind of getting the better of this fight?" Right. And I thought, the short guy with the green trunks. Well, yes. Ali was the tall guy with the red trunks. And I said to myself that day, this was in 1972, I said, for the rest of my life, I am never going to try to con myself that my team lost because the referees were against them, or my guy got beat because his shoes were too small, or that was a bad call, or he had a bad night. And I've tried to maintain that all these years since then. I try to be objective.
Yeah. I'll tell you, Frank.
You asked me about how I wrote, Mac. My style was, I know what I'm talking about. I'm a good historian, but there are guys that are better historians than I am. But I'm a fight analyst, and I can break the fights down, and I can read what's the ring combat as well or better than anybody I know. So I would write about that mostly, unless I was writing a personal story about Jimmy Young, who I got to know at Frazier's gym.
Great story, Frank, by the way, again. Listen, I love that fight. I've watched that fight, Frazier Ali, fight of the century. And you notice I put Frazier first when I say it. I even had my boss.
That's how it was billed, Mac. It was billed Frazier versus Ali.
They say Ali Frazier now, Frank. That's what.
Well, now they do, but it was billed Frazier versus Ali.
Right. So anyway, I even had my boss watch it 2 years ago. When he watched, he said that was the most unbelievable fight I've ever seen, and he's a big box fan. He just never saw that fight. So let's get to what you're doing today. You're on National Streaming Sports Network. You're on our YouTube channel. You're on our Roku channel, and you're on with Jack Hirsch right now. And you know, I produce the show for you guys, so I'm a little biased. But to me, your show, and I've watched other shows. Believe me, I do that quite often. I look at the competition, and they're backed by maybe bigger networks. They may have the commercials going on more, but there's not a better show on the air, on the internet, I say all the time, than Glove Fist. So what do you think would set, and I imagine you watch other podcasts too, Frank, other shows. What do you think sets Glove Fist apart from the rest of them?
I think we're honest. We give a fair point of view, and we know what we're talking about from all ends. We're not two fans that just like boxing and talk about it. Jack and I have both been involved. We both fought, at different levels. We've both covered it. We know people in the business, and we know how the business works. So I think that is probably the strength of the show, that you have two guys who have a love for it. We can talk about anything, I'm going to say 1964 forward, because we're close in age. And look, I like talking about stuff that I saw. Okay? I never saw Jack Johnson fight. Okay? I never saw Jack Dempsey fight. There's a lot of film on them, but it's just different. Just like today, I try, when my nephews or some of my partner, Wendy, her children are like, in their late 20s, early 30s. And Mac, all they've seen is Mayweather. And they think Mayweather's the greatest. And I try to say, look. And they also think LeBron is better than Jordan. And I try to say, look. You didn't see Jordan. You didn't live through the Jordan era. You never saw Sugar Ray Leonard or Duran. You've only seen Mayweather. I've seen Jordan and LeBron, the best of them. I've seen the best of Leonard and Mayweather, Duran and Mayweather, and name other fighters. I said, so you can't speak on what you didn't see or live through. I said, I've said Michael Jordan was more feared than LeBron. LeBron may be a better... He may check more boxes on things he can do, but he didn't have the clutch gene that Jordan had. And it's like, if I was going to build a team around one of them, I would start with Jordan. And Leonard could do everything Mayweather could do, only faster and better.
Better. I agree. And I agree with you too. I think Durant would beat him. I think there's quite a few boxers I think would beat
Mayweather.
I just had a brain. Thank you, Mayweather. So Frank,
Mac, the problem with Mayweather is, I think
there's a lot of problems with Mayweather as far as a fighter. He was only concerned about his record, which to me is the first thing that I don't like.
Is hollow.
Secondly, he's all about. He's not about boxing. He's about Floyd Mayweather. I don't like that either about him. And I think a defensive fighter is good. That's great that you're a great defensive fighter, which he was. You got to give him his due. But to be able to be a better all-around boxer, to take anybody on, that's a little different to me. And that's where
Mac, he never tested himself. He may be greater than all of them. He never tested himself. Everything was concocted so he had an advantage in the field of play. And he picked his spots and waited at the right time to fight certain guys. So maybe he could. I don't think he reached his full potential. But where I do disagree with you is this. And even though it's a little bit, it may not be nice to say, but Mac, he did have a point when he says, "Look, when fighters are done, and they're no longer at the top and provide entertainment for the fans, nobody cares about them. And when they fall in hard times because of their health, or they were ripped off, or weren't educated enough on what to do with their money, nobody cares about them. Nobody's going to come and save them." So I can see his point where the money was a factor, but I just think, how much money do you need? And that's fine. If you want to be a guy that, you want to say you're the richest, okay. But that comes with a cost, and your legacy takes a hit. So,
I agree. So Frank, let's get to the Olympic boxing is going to be coming up here soon. Olympic boxing when I was a kid was huge. We take somebody like a Sugar Ray Leonard or the Spink brothers or, Jones, and we'd watch them box in Olympics and we'd follow them throughout their careers. It's sad that the biggest story right now in France is they're letting transgender women boxers box women. That's the biggest story out there right now. It is. It's sick. And It's sad. It's a sad thing. I mean, I remember watching the Stevensons and the great Cuban fighters and the Russian fighters, some Ukrainian fighters going up against the United States. And like I said, I watched these guys grow through the amateur into the pro, and it was you felt part of their story. Even though Sugar Ray Leonard, I maybe liked a couple of welterweights more than him. I felt part of his story, Frank. I saw him grow as a boxer and was astonished at how great he became. And that they don't have that no more.
Mac, the world is just between social media and technology. The world is it's too fast now. I don't even know how to find the platforms to watch the sports. It's like I punch in, I go to my remote and say boxing, Olympic boxing, or Olympic judo, because they're my two favorite sports in the Olympics. And it's crazy because they don't develop the fighters. They don't develop a storyline. In a way, we kind of miss Cosell because he did do that. And then when these guys, we see them after the Olympics and they turn pro and we follow their careers and we get to see them on the weekends. We don't get gouged, just like Crawford's fights this weekend. Mac, it's an HBO fight. It shouldn't be a pay-per-view fight. He's fighting a guy that has 11 fights, just like when Roberto Duran fought Davey Moore, who had 12 fights, and he won his junior middleweight title. It's the same thing, but it's like they don't develop the stories. And then if somebody would have said to you in 84, the Holyfield Olympics, or 92, the De La Hoya Olympics, if someone would have said, in about 20 years, men are going to be fighting women in the Olympics, wouldn't you just say that's crazy?
We wouldn't believe it. We would have been, you're out of your mind.
I mean, think about this, Mac. If I punch Wendy, I go to jail. But if I do it in a ring or in a cage, it's no problem.
Yeah, that's basically what they said. That's basically what the French chiefs over there said. They lifted the ban that was there from the World Championships, and they're going to let them go.
Right.
And
how crazy that? What do they need? Somebody to die or get maimed, which is what's going to happen.
It sure is. It sure is. It's a huge difference. So, to me,
that's a turnoff, though.
That's how sad Olympic boxing has become. I mean,
I've read that there's not going to be Olympic boxing after 2028.
Something? There might not be, Frank. There might not be, because there's nobody out there right now that can take charge of that. So let me get to my last question for you. I think it's a pretty good one. You're a big sports fan. So where is boxing better than other sports, and where is it worse than other sports, Frank?
That's a great question. Where is it better? Well, from a sporting sense, the conditioning, how hard it is to be a fighter. Like, a lot of people don't realize, if you decide to be a fighter, that's all you're doing. That's your life. If you're going to do it the right way. It's not fun. It's bed early, no partying, training all the time, watching what you eat. I know a couple guys that are on the cusp where they're thinking about maybe turning pro as boxers or maybe getting into MMA. And I've told them, and these guys are in their mid-20s because I train with them now. And I say, are you sure you want to do that? Do you know what kind of a commitment that is? There's no guarantee that you're going to make it. And it could end really bad. So where is it better? I think from a conditioning point of view, I think from learning how to overcome adversity, I think it helps. And I didn't get a chance to mention this, but you know what, Mac? Because of Muhammad Ali, I learned about racism and how to deal it. And when I say that, I mean, I grew up in a household, in a home that was all Italian. And, the pictures that in my grandfather's house were Marciano, DiMaggio, and Bruno Sammartino. And nobody was better than those guys. And he hated Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, called him every ethnic name in the book, draft dodger, the whole bit. And I remember he would give my father a hard time about me liking Ali and saying, what's wrong with him? And then it really hit home. I remember when Ali made his comeback fight against Jerry Quarry in 1970. Mac, I was conflicted because here I am in 6th grade. I'm a white guy. Black guys are dominating the heavyweight division. And I'm thinking to myself, I should be rooting for Quarry. I should be rooting for him to beat Ali. It just so happened that that was one of the fights that my dad didn't take me to because I was bad in school that week, and the teacher sent a letter home. And my father realized the ultimate way to punish me is to go to the fight with my uncle and my cousin. And my cousin was my age. Mac, I thought he was going to take me to that fight. I really did. You know when I realized that he wasn't taking me to fight? When I was sitting in the house looking out the dining room window and my dad's Rail Eldorado is going down the street with my uncle and my cousin. They're on their way to watch the fight. But he said, not taking you. He said, but I'll tell you what. I'll call up and tell your mother who won the fight. So when the fight was over,
Right.
my father went to a payphone and he said, tell that little SOB that Ali won the fight.
Right,
so my mother, she comes up my bedroom and she goes, Ali won. And it's like, I remember thinking, man, I'm glad he won, because if Quarry won, I just don't think the world would be in balance. Ali won. Now it seems like the world's in balance. And to finish the second part of your question, as far as where's boxing bad, Mac, it ruins you. How many guys escape? Think about this, and I hate to say this, but I would say the 3 most iconic fighters in history, and they're 3 of the greatest, chronologically, are Joe Louis, Sugar Ray Robinson, and Muhammad Ali. Louis and Robinson ended up with financial troubles and ill health. Ali didn't have much financial trouble, but he had ill health, and it came from boxing. So it's like, I don't have kids. If I had a son, boy, I would do whatever I could to keep him from boxing, because as I said to you, no one realizes the commitment it is to do it. And there's no guarantee of how far you're going to go. And there's just no backup plan. So there are sometimes like when I read about a death in the ring, Max, sometimes I get mad that I love the sport so much, but I just can't turn it off. It's in my blood.
Hey, listen, I get that, and I get what you're saying. Frank, I got to cut the interview so I can make sure I can get it out there for the people. But I'll tell you, it's a pleasure having you on. I've never really interviewed you like in this kind of setting. Great interview, Frank. I appreciate you coming in. And everybody, Glove Fist, Monday night, 7 p.m. on Northeast Streaming Sports YouTube, and, of course, on the National Streaming Sports Roku channel. Frank,